All right, here we are for loose ends. Let me know if you can hear me okay, both in the Moore's Law's Discord and the after video chat, and also here in the live stream, and then we will get started. Okay, we hear in all caps. I don't know if that's a good thing. Okay, let's see. Still waiting. Let me know if I sound all right, everybody. Okay, I see several confirmations in multiple areas that I sound good. So, yeah, I mean, let's get started. This is the February Loose Ends live stream. For those who haven't watched one before, basically, patrons submit questions ahead of time, and I will be going through those as we do the recording here. And also, while I'm going, though, you can tip and send me a question live if you think of one on the spot. And I will answer that as well. So don't hold back. If you have a question about anything from this month, anything coming this year, then just give a tip and ask a question now. Join the Patreon. You can ask questions in the video chat section of the Moore's Law's Dead Discord as well if you have access to that. And yeah, so speaking of this month, I gotta say this was definitely a slower month than the last one. There was just endless news in January. Frankly, it just felt like a continuation of 2022 where I just couldn't keep up with all of it. And now we've been able to have kind of a normal month, which in some ways it's like, well, there's less to discuss, and that's a little disappointing. But in other ways, I've actually had time to get enough sleep half of these nights. So that's been nice in many respects. But I actually do have quite a bit to talk about today in this live stream. Nonetheless, it hasn't been a month with zero news. Before I get into that, though, let me say that as usual, this live stream is sponsored by Micro Center. Micro Center is having March Monitor Madness right now. And they want me to just remind you guys that there's not really a good point. There's not really a point in having a good PC if you don't have a good monitor with it. And I do actually agree with that quite a bit. And they're doing a bunch of sales right now on their website. In fact, if you click on one of the links in the description, you'll see a link to a monitor, and it's 144 hertz, 31 and a half inch, 4K. So 144 hertz 4K monitor for $500. There's also a link in the description to get $25 off any processor. This stacks with other deals going on at Micro Center as well. In addition to the deal where if you post a picture of your build to them on their website, they give you another $25 off. So I don't know even what they're doing now. They're giving away free RAM with Zen 4. I saw Raptor Lake i7's coming with a free 1 terabyte Gen 4 SSD for a discounted price on top of it with $50 off a motherboard. All of that, you can get another $50 off with this as well and pick up a good monitor too. So take the time to click those links in the description of all those sponsors today. I may mention a couple others as well. It really does help the channel a lot, even if you don't go to the store. But I do actually think now is a great time to do a build. So yeah. Anyways, there's that. And let's get into it. And actually, I'll put a timestamp right here before I do any of the reader mails because I have some updates on the RTX 4070. So let me see. Timestamp 4070. So honest to God, like, I think we've been hearing endless rumors about the 4070. I mean, I leaked pictures of it, what, like 6 months ago at this point. And not that much has changed. It does seem like it's probably a 12 gigabyte card, and it does seem like it's going to be cut down a decent amount. But I have learned recently that this is going to be, as far as I'm aware, one of the first Lovelace cards to not require a Gen 5 connector on all of the models. So some of them will be using 8 pins, maybe even a single 8 pin. And what that tells me is reduced costs and a move for compatibility with older power supplies, but also that it's probably going to use about 200 watts. And so I think it's really all coming together here about what the 4070 is. The 4070 is going to basically be a 3080 12 gigabyte that uses 200 watts. And I'll be honest, if that was $600 or less, I actually think that'd be a somewhat interesting product that would be better than what you could have gotten for $600 or less in the previous generation, and it bring much greater efficiency. But I will also say that, like I keep bringing up, the lower you go down in the product stack, the more price to performance matters because you're not bringing new levels of performance. If that 4070, which is basically just a 200 watt 3080 12 gigabyte, if that thing costs more than $600, I think it's just not interesting at all. Because I mean, you're basically just getting a 3080 for 3080 pricing 3 years later, and you can get the 6950 XT for $700 right now, and it has more RAM. AMD just did an update that boosted ray tracing performance on RDNA too, and actually it probably like, especially if you don't take into account ray tracing, it'll just beat that 4070 most likely by 10-20% anyways. So, at the end of the day, unless the 4070 is $600 or less. I think by the time it comes out, there will be like $600 or less 6950 XTs anyways that are a far better option. And so I guess the ball is in Nvidia's court. But yeah, that is what the 4070 is. I imagine I'll be full leak re-looking at everything, checking everything, telling you everything um within a month. Well, during this month as well, as I've almost got it all accumulated. Trying to think if there's really anything else to say about it. Oh, it still sounds like it's launching in April. So there you go. That's still what I'm hearing. April launch for the 4070 again. So if it's $600, cool. If it's more, it's stupid, I think. But one card that looks like it's not going to be stupid, moving on to the second subject I wanted to discuss before we got deep into this, is the recent testing I've seen on Jared's Tech of the RX 7600 which I think there's been some disappointment, there's been some happiness regarding some of the RDNA 3 launches. Obviously, the XTX continues to sell excellently. Well, the XT is basically an $800 card already without an official price drop because let's just be honest, the 7900 XT should have been $800 or less the whole time. You ask me, it should have been 750. That's what I would have priced it at. And I would have just called it the 7800 XT, but water under the bridge, that's just regurgitating something that we've said a million times. Check the links in the description. Jared's Tech tested Navi 33 in an Asus laptop, and it wasn't even the full Navi 33. It was the 28 compute unit model limited to 95 watts, and it beats the 3060, which in the laptop configuration, guys, is more CUDA cores than the desktop version. It beats like a 150 watt, or I think it was 140 watt 3060, and was often trading blows with uh like 150 watt 3070 TIs. So, I mean, that's a 95 watt card that's cut down competing with probably the laptop 4070 that's on 4 nanometer and has a similar die size. There's just no way around it. The full die can go up at least 20% higher in TDP and laptop. It has another 10% more compute units. I think for sure the 7600 MXT is going to, at a minimum, be a solid 4060 competitor. And I mean, look at match the 3070 Ti. It's gonna be a 4070 competitor. And that's kind of shocking to me because let's be very clear. I leaked this. The 4070 laptop die is 185 millimeter squared about. This is a 200 millimeter squared 6 nanometer die that is about the same performance in seemingly similar efficiency. So I don't have too much to dwell on here. Just make sure you check out that Jared's Tech review because this really does suggest that if AMD can scale its performance even higher on desktop, which to be fair, we don't know for sure. We don't know if Navi 33 hits a performance wall at like a 120 watts, similar to how the 4070 laptop edition seems to hit a performance wall at 105 watts. But if it can scale to like 150 watts, then I think there's no doubt about it. AMD has a card that costs less to make than a 6600 XT that is probably going to bring you at least 3070 performance in 1080p, maybe even 6800. And yeah, that's really exciting. If they wanted to, they could charge $300 for this thing and spit it out like crazy. And I would suggest they're probably going to charge 350 then. And I just don't really see how Nvidia competes with that, with how small of a die they're using for their 4060 and 4070 series, because it's just ridiculous. And hopefully this brings some balance back to the laptop pricing market. Jared's Tech even said he was told that the 7600S laptops might start at like $1,100. If that's true, that just completely undercuts Lovelace, and that suggests the 7600 MXT laptops with Phoenix can maybe be 1,500, and that would just be better than a 4070 laptop for like $500 to $1,000 less. So that's really exciting. That gives me a lot of hope here. And it also actually, and this is a good time to transition to what I've leaked about Phoenix this month. This also suggests that perhaps Navi 31 itself just is the issue with RDNA 3. Maybe RDNA 3 is great, but in that configuration, there's just bugs or something. Because think about it. If Navi 33 performs even like a 3070, if it does on desktop, we'll have to see if it does. There's still a lot of unknowns, but if it does, I mean, that means it's performing almost half as well as like a 7900 XTX, but it has a third the compute units, a third the bus width, and it's using 6 nanometer instead of 5 nanometer for part of the die. Guys, I mean, that tells you something's wrong with Navi 33. Navi 33 shouldn't be just twice as powerful. It should be easily more than that. Like, I don't like you would think at least 150% better based on the specs difference. And if it's not, and I just leaked that Phoenix seems to, at the same power usage to Rembrandt, bring about a 30% or more graphics uplift uh, without any compute unit increase. That tells you that if Phoenix pans out that well and Navi 33 pans out as well overall as what we're starting to see, that just tells you that Phoenix scales great past what RDNA 2 gave you. That Navi 33 does, and that possibly Navi 32 will. Navi 31 just needs some fix in the drivers, or I was just talking to Dan today. Maybe it just wasn't as good of a design as the rest of RDNA 3. We're gonna have to see, but I'm excited by this Jared's Tech review of the 7600S laptop because it really shows that AMD maybe didn't have a bad architecture. They maybe just had a bad implementation of it. But yeah, so I also leaked Phoenix details. Phoenix seems like a solid 20 to 40% better than Rembrandt at just about everything, depending on what you're talking about. And in fact, I'll give this little tidbit as well. This is exclusive. I haven't talked about this anywhere else. I've heard that AMD is considering upping the official TDP as OEMs can clock Phoenix too. And I asked this person, aren't you talking about Dragon Range? Because from what we're seeing, Dragon Range seems to basically match top Raptor, like while using less energy. I'm sure if AMD overclocked Dragon Range more, they just take the laptop crown right now. And he said, no, they're talking about Phoenix. They think there is performance left on the table for the integrated graphics and the CPU with Phoenix. So I don't know. It's weird seeing so many specs shift on AMD's website right now with Phoenix and Dragon Range. But well, some of that seems to suggest bad things. I would also point out that AMD seems to be considering launching higher clocked models or allowing OEMs to clock Phoenix and I would assume though also Dragon Range as high in TDP as Intel is. And frankly, I don't know why AMD wouldn't do this. If you ask me, what do I want in a laptop? You know, I just want a good 8 core that uses like 35 watts and doesn't hold back my 75-watt graphics card. I have no interest in shoving a 4090 or a 4080 in my laptop. Give me a solid 12 or 16 gigabyte card that doesn't overheat, doesn't get too loud, and doesn't have a CPU that's throttling after being used for 1 minute. Just limit it to 35 watts, give it ample cooling, and give me consistent performance that doesn't like have the frame rate jump all over the place while I'm gaming on a laptop. That's what I look for. And so I think that's what AMD goes for with them limiting their TDPs on CPUs and laptops more so than Intel does. Like they like that Intel has the mantle of the hot and loud crown in laptops right now. But Raptor Lake is a lot better than Alder Lake. And if AMD just added 20% more TDP to some of their chips, I think they could just take all of the crowns. And I think they should do it, frankly. Doesn't mean OEMs have to do it with all of their models, but it's just food for thought. I think that's an interesting thing that I'm hearing. And then I guess the other thing that I'm going to talk about today a lot, and there will be reader mails about it, is Intel's situation right now. I have a lot of things that just I really think people are fundamentally underestimating what Intel's earnings are going to look like in the next in the next 2 quarters. But I don't really have much to say about that specifically until I get to those questions. So let's start getting to the questions now. Before I do, guys, click the links in the description to support the channel. Please double check that you're subscribed to Moore's Law is Dead, trying to get those numbers up. That really helps us actually have more negotiating power to put less ads in our content. So please subscribe to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel and ring the bell button and hit the like button. There's almost 500 of you watching. Hope we can get to at least 500 likes here. So let's see what we have in terms of tipped questions first. Imperial Red Fox just gives a tip. Thank you. Jensen Wang, Tensor enthusiast, writes in and says, remind people to buy the 4080 before it's out of stock. This is a person LARPing as Jensen Wang, making fun of the fact that Nvidia has been restricting 4090 supply. And then we have Hamza Jude. So yeah, let me put this here because it seems like we're going to get a lot of Intel questions early. So let's just get through all of that right now. Intel's situation is what I will call this. Okay. So just scroll down to all of those questions. So Hamza Judah writes in and says, what are your thoughts on Intel canceling Rialto Bridge in Lancaster Sound? And then also Carbon Cry writes in from the Moore's Law is Dead Patreon, which remember you can do for free if you support us ahead of time. And he says, do you have any comments on Intel's massacre of their server GPU lineup? Honestly, I don't have that much to say. I think I was the one who leaked Rialto Bridge as well. That's funny to realize it's never coming out anyways. Um, you know, at the end of the day, I think it's become obvious that Intel has finally woken up and accepted that they cannot afford to be a PowerPoint company, a glorified PowerPoint company that every few months whips out a new PowerPoint and says, hey, look at this shit we're not going to launch in 5 years. Because from my perspective, that's half of what Intel's been doing here. They whip out a PowerPoint. It looks really cool. They show something with 1,000 chiplets and a billion, like HBM5 and all this crap. And then they say, by the way, 2025 or later, and then half of it never ends up coming out. I mean, it's taken so long for Sapphire Rapids, Ponte Vecchio to come out. And I just think Intel needs to is accepting that even if they have a company with like 4 or 5 times the employees as AMD or something, that doesn't mean you can do 4 to 5 times the products competently. That there's just inefficiencies in middle management and how many things you can keep track of and launch at the same time. And that if you're having any issues, great. So you have 4 times or 5 times the employees of AMD. You're also running all of these foundries, and wouldn't it be, which is taking up a lot of that employee count, wouldn't it be better instead of trying to launch like 4 or 5 times the things as AMD, if you just launched twice as many things and they always came out on time because you have more employees to keep track of it and make sure everything's ready? That's kind of like what I've been talking about with them nerfing Granite Rapids, Sierra Forest, Meteor Lake the Meteor Lake lineup, and everything basically having to do with ARC, as these questions have pointed out. And yeah, that's all I think this is. I think they're looking at how long it took them to get Ponte Vecchio out, and they're realizing that there's no way they're going to launch like Rialto Bridge and then Falcon Shores on time, trying to do all of these things at once. And that probably they probably realized too that Rialto Bridge really wouldn't have been that popular if I had to guess as well. So that's really all I think about it. I wouldn't say it's a good thing they're canceling things, right? That doesn't suggest the company's firing on all cylinders, but I would suggest that I would rather see them cancel Rialto Bridge than cancel Lunar Lake or like Battle Mage entirely. Like I think, like I've leaked, Arcs effectively cancel, but I still think they should launch like low end cards or something every year. And I would rather them cancel Rialto Bridge, right? Because I think that is far more of a chance of having more delays and not doing really anything for them. Let me see here. So let me keep going down these Intel questions. Again, please hit the like button. Envious writes in and says, hi, Tom. Any updates on Intel's GPUs? We had that LinkedIn leak for iGPU roadmap, and then data center canceled everything. What is going on with this company? And Bfish also writes in and says, are there any whispers on Meteor Lake? There was that leaked roadmap showing tiles for Meteor Lake, Air Lake, and Panther Lake, and it's looking like a CES next year launch. Could they make it to back to school season and get it into thin and lights for Meteor Lake? So I basically already been dancing around this, but like what's going on at Intel? Just in general, what I've said in a couple of videos last year about Intel's effective cancellation of ARC, I really have nothing to change. I said that there would be a weird launch of Alchemist and it would be drawn out. And I don't even know if they've even launched the A580 yet, actually, and that's what we're seeing. And there may be other half-ass launches from Alchemist over this year, but ultimately it's just going to be a weird one where you never quite know when it's out, like, and there's issues. And then Battle Mage is probably going to come out, I don't know, beginning of next year, and hopefully it can approach mid-range performance or low end. But they've canceled almost all of the Battle Mage lineup, and they still have the Celestial moving forward a little bit. But none of this stuff is as all encompassing as it used to be. Like, there were going to be multiple Battle Mage dies that try to compete at all levels. They've axed most of that, and at the end of the day, I have nothing to add. Alchemist is going to continue to be a weird generation. They might launch other Alchemist products, but they still haven't even launched the A580, so it's hard to say what a real launch even is. With this stuff. And Battle Mage and Celestial are on life support, and Raja's been demoted. And the graphics group's actually been killed off. So I don't know. Like, that's all there is to say, because I don't really think Intel entirely knows what they're doing yet either. We've just been talking about how Intel axed Rialto Bridge. I mean, they didn't even really announce that long ago. So I don't even think Intel knows what ARC products they'll be launching next year, if I'm being entirely honest with you. And so trying to guess exactly what happens to that, I don't know. I would just say they're going to keep doing these weird launches, and I hope they at least keep the drivers that they've been slaving over for years now moving forward, and they keep at least doing Battle Mage and Celestial tiles for their APUs and desktop stuff, and maybe server, so that they don't throw that driver work away. And then if the company gets on a good footing by 2026, then they just reboot Intel graphics. Because I think they need to get rid of this ARC branding. The ARC brand is terrible. It's renowned for being bad now. I think they got to keep their graphics development on life support, do the occasional low end or mid range launch once in a blue moon to keep the development going, to not lose it, and to keep development going ahead of time for scaling up the tiles on their APUs. Right? If they're launching lower mid range or low end cards on desktop every year, that means they're working towards scaling their integrated graphics before their integrated graphics reach that level of performance. That is why they hit a scaling wall with what is it? Broadwell was good, but then Skylake just hit a wall in graphics performance. You got to work on desktop to scale down. So I hope they don't abandon all of it. But outside of that, I wouldn't expect anything crazy. And frankly, the stuff about tiles and Meteor Lake and Arrow Lake and Panther Lake, I have nothing to like. Yeah, this Celestial Battle Mage and Druid development that Intel's doing is parallel to what they're doing with like Arrow Lake and Lunar Lake, and so yeah, they're always going to make smaller versions of those cards for the tiles for like Arrow Lake. And I don't I actually I think Video Cards actually said that in their article. Like, this isn't really new information. Like, we knew they were going to have little tile versions of these architectures for Arrow Lake anyways. And in terms to Beefish's question about when is Meteor Lake coming out, I mean, as far as I'm aware, they're still going to try to do some type of laptop launch this year, but because it's Intel, I hesitate to double down on exactly what that means, because Intel is just such a bizarre company right now that's hard to bet anything really on. Um, Samantha Vimes writes in, as the nerfs, cutbacks, and layoffs continue to mount, do you sense any souring of the company's opinion against Pat? I know everyone says if Pat can't save us, nobody can, but I'm wondering how long that leash is for Pat, and if they really still mostly believe that at the company. And then Enigma writes in with a tip. Thank you for the tip, and says, how would you rate Pat's performance so far? So, honestly, guys, it's so hard to say, because without being like omnipotent and like without the ability to know all, it's hard for me to tell how much of Intel's performance under Pat is just always going to be this rocky and no one else could have done a better job, and how much of it was because Pat maybe didn't handle things correctly. I don't know that I give him a rating, but I would say that give me a year, one more year. Let's see what happens with Meteor Lake and Granite Rapids. Granite Rapids is really going to be what I use to evaluate Intel's future. And once Granite Rapids is out or not out mid next year, then I'll tell you what grade I would give Pat. But for now, I would just say I was hoping to go better than this by now for sure. And it's not going as well as I thought it would. If that's Pat's fault or not, I'm not sure yet, though. To Samantha Vimes part of the question, though, are people souring on Pat? I would say in the investor world, they're starting to actually. It seems like investors are starting to get more and more mad at Pat, and going, you said this would happen. You said you'd leave AMD in the dust. Why hasn't that happened yet? But the employee is not yet. Employees still seem to be fully behind Pat. I don't see them souring at all. Not saying they won't eventually, but I don't see them doing that right now. Um, Let me see here. Let's see. Wholesome DJ Aftershock writes in and says, been looking at various AMD employees' LinkedIn accounts. Lots of Intel alumni started to appear, especially starting last year in 2022. Yeah, I personally know a couple sources that used to be Intel sources, now AMD. Say that. Which I'm not really giving anything away because a lot of AMD's new employees used to work at Intel. Actually, a lot of Intel employees used to work at AMD, so they go back and forth. But yeah, that's definitely true. The only thing I would say, what was that guy's name who wrote in a tip? Wholesome DJ Aftershock. The only thing I'd say to that is that's not as uncommon as you would think. Like, and I wonder if the magnifying glass of Intel's recent performance is making people look at the people joining AMD with Intel in their resume under more scrutiny than before. Because any year you would check, you'd find people at Radeon that worked in Nvidia, people at Intel that worked at AMD. Like these are things that you always find. I'd say there's maybe more than usual, but that's always kind of been the case. They always jump between each other. KJM015 writes in and says, hey, Tom, how long do you think it will take for Intel to transition to their next silicon node? Is Intel 4 right around the corner, or should we expect another long chain of refreshes like the 14 nanometer process? Well, Intel 4 is going to be used for Meteor Lake, so that should be right around the corner. And Intel 3 should be out with products mid next year. For now, I don't see anything happening like 14 nanometer. Like right now. That's my current opinion of the matter after talking to people at Intel. No, I don't see this as a 10 nanometer situation and not even really as a 14 nanometer situation. But to be fair, we're going to need to give it a year to be sure about that. But right now, I'm much more concerned about Intel's design teams and really just resource management than I am about their foundry team's ability to release nodes on time. That's for now, though. I mean, I'm saying this, and Intel's still making all of their products on 10 nanometer or 14 nanometer and 14 nanometer. So until that changes, you know, you could argue there's no evidence their foundry team's on track yet. But from what I hear, they seem to be doing much better than in the previous decade. Chris Rich writes in and says, a year ago, we still had some hope that Intel could save us from the GPU apocalypse. Now we have to hope that they can save themselves, though. How much trouble do you think Intel are really in? And how concerned do you think we should be about their future competitiveness? Very. You should be very worried. That doesn't mean that I'm saying Intel's doomed. I am not saying that. What I'm saying, though, is if you would have asked me 5 years ago, should I be worried about Intel's future? I'd have said no. I would have, you're right, because I started the channel 4 years ago. Yeah, 5 years ago, before I started Moore's Law is Dead, I would have said no. And then even in like 2019, when I said Intel is not too big to fail or something, that was one of my first decently successful videos. Even then I would have said, well, I'm just trying to point out that they need to change how they're doing things so they don't fail. I'm not saying that they will or won't. I'm just saying if you think they're invincible, they're not. We've seen IBM and, whatever. Even then, after releasing that video, I would have said, well, I'm not like fundamentally worried yet. I just think that there's a avenue here to a bleak future that I never even saw before ever in my life. And so when you ask me, should we be concerned about their future competitiveness? I say yes in the sense of you should be worried because it actually seems like it's up for debate now what their future is going to look like in a way that it just was a 0% chance that I'd worry about that before. But yeah, the next 18 months for Intel are going to be critical for what happens to their company over the next decade. Let's put it that way. Okay. Now let us move in to let's round back to some more 4070 and Lovelace questions here. Let me see. Timestamp. Talked about Intel for a while, but we hammered out all those right away. Nvidia supply 4070 Lovelace. Okay. So we have a tipped question from T Dills. He says, "Is there any chance of a 4080 price cut and the 4080 Ti launching at 1200, or do you think the Ti will cost more to avoid undercutting the 4090's performance?" Kinhoon also writes in, by the way, on this note and says, "Hey Tom, I don't know why Nvidia won't just drop the price of the 4080. I know several of my coworkers that were interested in a 4080 on paper, but decided to get a 7900 XTX instead because it beats the 4080 on average in the games they play. And frankly, even though the ray tracing is worse, it's on par or better than a 3090 Ti. And that's good enough for most gamers, especially if you just turn it to lower ray tracing settings. I truly believe the 4080, if it was $900 to $1,000, would sell very well from what I hear from real gamers I talk to with the money. And it seems that gamers just want next gen performance, but don't want to pay for a 4090 and are all getting the 7900 XTX because it is better than last gen. When do you think Nvidia will finally wake up?" Um, I think we're gonna find out in about a month if Nvidia's woke up. I think the 4070 is launching in April, certainly by April, and if it's priced at $600, then we'll know they're starting to get a little more aggressive. If it's priced at 650 or 700, then we'll know Nvidia is stubborn. And that's about it. And so that's my answer to Kinnahoon. Like, what do we have to look for? It's like, well, they did change the name of the 4080 12 gigabyte and drop it to $800. That showed they were willing to basically admit they were wrong, but they didn't admit it by much, right? The specs literally didn't change, and the price was still too high to really sell great. So I, I think it didn't signal they've really learned any lesson. Um, if it was $700, I would have gone, oh, I guess they realized they've made a mistake, but it wasn't. And 700 to 1200, that would have left a huge gulf in pricing to the 4080 if it was 700. So, yeah, I would say any chance of a 4080 price cut, I just don't personally. I don't see that happening until like late summer this year if it does happen. And here's why. So I think right now Nvidia knows they can just crush data center sales because AMD just really isn't seen as a good option by most people right now in data center. If you look at Jared's tech review of the 7600S, in creative tasks, that was what he was disappointed by relative to Nvidia. And AMD still has a lot of work to do in that department. They're doing better, but they still have a lot of work to do. So I think right now Nvidia knows they can sell 8102 dies, which is used for the 4090, into data center, make their money there, constrict 4090 supplies I leaked earlier this month, links in the description, and then try to get people to buy the 4080 at 1200. And I think they're just trying to constrict the 4090 until the 4080 sells out, which remember, they didn't ship very many 4080s, but I think they want to get rid of that initial like 20 to 50,000 GPU shipment or something that have been sent. Once that sells out, then they'll start supplying more 4090s again, I suspect. Start trying to supply more 4070 Ti's and 4070s, and then just see where the chips land there. And if it is almost impossible for them to get rid of the 4080 over the next 2 months, and the 4090 sales continue to decline like I've leaked they kind of are already, then I think that's where they go, okay, well, we tried everything this summer, and now maybe they'll make this decision in July or August. They'll go, and you know what? The 4080 has been out for over half a year now. All right. Well, it's been out for over half a year. Then it's not too soon for a price drop. If Nvidia drops the price now, they're burning early 4080 adopters. If they wait till late summer, where they tried everything they could to try to manipulate supply and get you to buy their stuff and it doesn't work, then they'll go, hey, it's been almost a year. We can drop the price. And then, yeah, that's when I could see them doing it. At $900, I think the 4080 would sell like hotcakes to enthusiasts. At $1,000, I don't know, especially if AMD updates their drivers and improves performance. The RDNA, they'll probably still go with the XTX, but I think there's almost no chance they do it right away. And then, yeah, maybe they launch a 4080 Ti. But to be clear, I'm not sure a 4080 Ti is going to be based on 8102 because the 4090 is already cut down by like 10% or something, or 11, 12%. Like it's cut down more than the 3090 was. And so I don't know if they need to cut it down more, right? Like they already have A6000, they already have a heavily cut down variant. I don't know that they need to. I think it'd be more likely that they launch a faster clocked, fully enabled 8103. Which remember the 4080 is actually a little cut down. You know, if they added like 15% performance to the 4080, they could just launch that for 1200 bucks or something if they really wanted to. Um, I'm not saying they won't do a 8102 version of for the 4080 Ti, but I don't really know what you'd do with the memory then. Do you give it 20 gigabytes of RAM? Seems odd, like an odd choice to me, doesn't it? So I think it's more likely they would wait for faster GDDR6X to come out, like 24 gigabit per second, fully enable it, let it run at 350 watts, and then, you launch something 10-20% better than the 4080, which would come within about 20% of the 4090. They launched that for 1200. That's more likely what I think they would do, and then drop the price of the 4080 at the same time. I just find it unlikely they're going to do like a 20 gigabyte 4080 Ti because I just it seems too I hate to say too generous to me for Nvidia. They just aren't very generous lately. And plus, tons of people are buying the 4090. So like, what motivation does Nvidia have to give you 8102 for less money? Like, they'd be better off just dropping the price on the 4090 or something, the 1500. Robert Alexanderson writes in and says, wanted you to know that I'm really thankful for your content. I was in the dark place. I was in a dark place for a couple years and it really helped me. If you have time, I wonder what's your favorite dog breed? Cheers from Sweden. Well, I've got a dog somewhere around here. Don't I? Yeah, she's asleep on the bed behind me. Uh, what's my favorite dog breed? I don't know, man. I really like Great Pyrenees. um, and there's some breeds I like more than other people. Like, I kind of like I generally like mutts, and I just don't think you can go wrong with like a lab mutt or a golden retriever mutt. Reese was actually mostly the plurality of her was Chow. I understand Chows can be very moody and mean at times, but if you have a Chow mutt that's trained well, they're like the most loyal and like clean and like obedient dog on earth. So Reese was actually like a Chow, and that goofy dog you saw for years. So I'm pretty. I kind of like them a lot. That's just you can't get a Chow unless you're a really strong dog owner. Yeah, and that's a problem. But I don't know. My easy recommendation is like Labs and Retrievers and Great Pyrenees. To be honest, Anatolian Shepherds. I love big, goofy, fun dogs. Let's see here. Let me see. Let me continue with some of these reader mail questions regarding Nvidia. Let's see. Dino999 writes in and says, hello, Tom. Nvidia is planning to throttle 4090 stock. Well, they already are. You can see it. Will this be when they release the remainder of Ampere stock, or is this just sold to get 4080s and 70 Ti's moving? Well, it's mostly for the 4080s. When are they going to get Ampere stock moving? I don't know, man. It seems like there's still plenty of 3070s arriving. But I think they're going to just continue to try to trickle things out so the prices don't collapse on last gen, frankly. Let's see here. Swiggles writes in, Nvidia keeps manipulating the market because they are in a dire situation. It's understandable, but what happens next? They are locked into a corner with Lovelace, it feels like, and the XTX is selling well. What's Nvidia's next ploy? I mean, I think there's not going to be a big new ploy yet. They've launched everything at high prices. They continue to trickle out stock with Ampere, 8102, 8103, back and forth, trying to keep prices high. And I think they're going to continue this weird balancing act for the through the summer. The only next ploy I would see is a surprising reversal in their pricing that frankly still wouldn't be that generous. Hear me out here. Like, I think it would come out of left field, maybe to AMD, if Nvidia did do a reboot of their lineup. Like, what if Nvidia just out of nowhere dropped the price of the 4090 to 1500, dropped the price of the 4080 to 1000, launched a $1200 4080 Ti that's 20% better than the 4080, dropped the price of the 4070 Ti to like 750, dropped the price of the 4070 to 600 or 550, and so on and so forth down the stack. And then they finally released all of that Lovelace supply they've been stockpiling because they bought up tons of it from TSMC. I think that could be a problem for AMD, but you could almost call it a ploy because look, guys, is a $1,000 380 millimeter squared 4080 generous? No, it's not. I think you can argue the 4080 should cost more than the 3080, but 900 tops. Like I would say 800 is really where it would be if they were trying to be aggressive at all. And so I think the next ploy would just be they've been so stingy, so greedy for the past couple of years that if they dropped prices by like 10% across the board and had good supply, people may have been gotten so used to rejecting Lovelace at the current prices that they just see those prices as good, even though they're still way more than they should be. That's the most I can come up with. But outside of that, they don't really have ploys left right now. Um, let's see here. Let's see. Alex Vega writes in and says, "Hi Tom, are you expecting to see more of these slow GPU rollouts continue, or do you see the likes of RDNA 4 or Lovelace releasing a full lineup at once, or at least at a much faster pace in the future? I'm new to the hardware space, and I haven't heard of this happening too often, at least not while I've been paying attention." Let me put down a timestamp here because I really like this question. When is the next full lineup? So let's see. So, right. And this has been a thing we've seen a lot now. Like if you look at the Ampere launch, they launched with the 3090, then the 3080, then a 3070 and 3060 Ti come out like end of 2020, and then a 3060, then a 3050, like like way into Ampere's life. And AMD has been doing the same thing. I mean, God, the 6900 XT came out, what is it, like quarter four 2020, and the 6500 XT, didn't that not come out until last year? Like, so, like, over like a year and a half later? Like, wasn't that 2022? Yeah, that launched January 2022. So that's a really drawn out launch release cycle. It didn't always used to be like this. Look, these companies would usually release one die, then another die. It's not like they would do them all at once. But when I was really just getting deep, 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 I was always a PC gamer to a certain extent, but when I really got into it deeply, I remember, a decade ago, the 7000 series from AMD, they launched like the 7970, 7950. Then I think like a few months later, the 7950 and 7770 and the 7850 and the 7870, they had 6 cards out with their new architecture, I believe within like the first 6 months of the architecture's life. I mean, if you look at AMD, that's just not been the case or Nvidia. So when is this going to happen again? Same with Pascal. Pascal launched the 1080, 1070, 1060, then 1080 Ti and 1050 Ti and 1050 within 6 months. Maybe not 6 months, but like 8 months. You had like a whole lineup using the new architecture, and the last gen was just gone. When is this going to happen again? I don't think you're going to see this happen again until a few things all happen at once. Before a new generation, the companies cleared the channel of all of their crap. So, like, it doesn't make any sense to roll out everything at once right now when you still have a ton of RDNA 2 at Ampere on shelves. So that needs to not be happening. There also needs to be a lot of demand. That kind of happened with Pascal, right? With the 10 series from Nvidia. Like, you had a ton of demand for Pascal at the same time that there wasn't that much Maxwell stock out there. There was, but it wasn't like now where there's just mountains of the stuff. And then also the companies have a lot of capacity up front. There's no point in launching 3 or 4 different dies at the same time or close to each other unless you actually have those wafers making that many cards to launch them. It costs money to launch them. There's marketing pushes, you know. So that's all going to happen at the same time then. You need to have the channel clear. You need to have a ton of demand while the channel's still clear. And then you have to have the company have a bunch of capacity ready right away. And so I don't know what the next time that's going to be. I kind of think RDNA 4 could be one of those situations, though, because you could see where we're coming off of a long glut of oversupply, and yet RDNA 3 and Lovelace didn't sell great, so they maybe cut back production. And then by the time RDNA 4 is about to launch, demand is back. People want stuff again, and maybe we're out of a recession by then, hopefully. And then that's when AMD might go, We're doing top to bottom. But yeah, that is a thing, Samantha or Alex Vega, that you used to see way more often. You used to see these companies do these big rollouts of a whole architecture, maybe one like every other gen, and we haven't really seen that for multiple gens. But it's because we haven't had the perfect storm for that to even make sense. I love that question though. That's a different question than I'm used to answering. It was fun. Let's see here. So Samantha Vimes writes in and says, how important do you think taking timing is for taking market share? Is it more or less meaningful during up and down markets? Current versus past generations matter in your mind? Um, well, yeah, I mean, uh if we're in an up or a down market, that affects it way more. If you're in an up market and everything that you put on shelves sells instantly, then timing doesn't matter that much as long as you can get it out the door because it'll sell. But an example of how important timing is, if Alchemist would have launched with the drivers they have now, which I have an A770 right here. I'm still, tested occasionally every time there's driver updates. I'm telling you, it's not as stable as Radeon. It's not. It just isn't. And it's not better than a 6700 that costs less, uses less energy, is more reliable. So Intel still is really in a bad spot with their current drivers. But they're better than before. I think if Intel would have launched with their current Arc drivers with a lot of supply in Q1 2022, 1 year ago, if when they said they were gonna launch it, by the way, if they would have actually launched before the shortages were over with the drivers they have now, even if they're not perfect, they are better than they used to be. They definitely are. I think they would have sold well and gotten great reviews. And that's an example of timing. We didn't need the A770 here. This is an RX 6700 with extra RAM that uses 50% more energy and has some stability issues. If we had this a year ago at the prices they are now, it would have been great. But right now, doesn't matter. AMD's already dropped prices, right? Until I saw Ryan Shrout tweet, the A750 is now $250, bringing balance back to gamers. Ryan, how are you bringing balance back to gamers if the 6600 has been $230 for 6 fucking months? You dropped the price of the A750 after AMD did. AMD brought balance back, and then you dropped prices because you had to, because your product isn't selling. So and Intel could have made that argument a year ago if they had the current drivers and supply, but they didn't, and that's the best example I can come up with where timing really matters. It really, and same with the 6500 XT. I know a lot of people hate the 6500 XT, but it actually sold really well. If that would have launched for $200 now, people would be it wouldn't have sold at all. So there you go. Timing really does matter. And let me get to some more of these tipped questions here. Chris Kennedy writes in and says, what are your thoughts on GameStop canceling all Resident Evil 4 Remake Collector Edition pre-orders in store only and now online pre-orders as well? Well, I hate to say it, dude, but I don't know anything about that. GameStop cancels RE4 order collectors edition. What? Huh. In store at the just Miss Mill. I don't know. That's really weird and crappy. I don't really have a the only thing I'd say is GameStop would not do this. Like, it's not like they wanted to do this. Um, and now they have no way of getting it. Yeah, that sucks. I don't know. I don't even know. I don't know what caused that, but I really don't know what GameStop could even do to fix the situation because it's like I guess you just I don't know. I guess if I was GameStop, I would switch their pre-order to the standard edition and give them like $5 to $10 off. That doesn't really make up for it, but some gesture would be nice. That I don't know. That sucks. Let's see here. Okay, we got a couple other questions. Let's see. Okay, let's go to this Xbox question to switch things up here. Put down a timestamp. Okay. Non's Goofy Videos writes in. I hope I said that name correctly. And he asks, I recall you discussed one of the Xbox SoCs would have been used in a laptop. Is there a chance for products like that as a sort of a hybrid console PC? I recall you discussed one of the Xbox SoCs being used in a laptop. Um, yeah, I think that was just me speculating that maybe they could do that. Obviously they've repurposed some PlayStation and Xbox dies into some, like, I think Chinese motherboards, but I don't think you really buy them in the US and they've locked down the graphics. So I don't know how much you'd really count that, but you know, is there a chance for like that on hybrid console on PC? No, I don't really think so because you have to understand the Xbox Series X, the Xbox Series S, and the PlayStation 5 are already cut down for yields. So what's left of that needs to be cut down more is going to be like, 1 to 5% of the yields. And then they're just selling those in like Asia as like a different type of APU. There's no real reason to sell that though as a laptop chip if you can sell it to console and they have contracts with Sony and Microsoft. I guess you could argue maybe they make more money in a laptop, but I actually don't know that they would, right? Like I guess maybe they would, but I think they also have contracts though with Sony and Microsoft that they can't just do that. So, you know, basically your question is, will Microsoft partner with AMD to sell Xbox SoCs in laptop as some agreement? Because I don't see PlayStation ever really letting that happen with their SoC. And at least from what I hear, Microsoft's plan with the Xbox is they just want more Game Pass. And I don't know that they see them launching that on laptop as really helping them at all. So I don't know. You'd think they would try this at some point, launch some like, I mean, they could do it. They could take the Series S APU, they could give it 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 because it's a 128-bit bus, unify the memory system and sell that on desktop or sell that in a laptop. But at the end of the day, I just don't think that they want to put in the money developing driver support for that on Windows or something. Like ultimately, that's what it really seems to come down to. And if they wanted to launch a Surface laptop, I mean, they can probably make even more money if they just bundle some sort of like, Phoenix with graphics card thing anyways and sell that for 3 grand. Because let's be clear about what that means. If Microsoft were to sell an Xbox Series S laptop, that sounds awesome, right? For how much? Are you paying $1,000 for it? Right? Like, because they need to add the screen, the battery. It's going to cost more to make than a Series S. My guess is people probably wouldn't want to spend more than like $600 for it. So, what are they going to have a cheap screen? Are they going to, you know, the second it gets even close to like 800, $1,000, I imagine Microsoft's like, well, we'd rather make a Surface laptop they buy for 2 grand or something. But yeah, so I think that's why. I think that's why you're not seeing that right now. But they are using it in server, so they always could. But I don't think Sony would, and I just think Microsoft just isn't motivated to really make that. All right, let's get to this question here. So Hamza Judah writes in and says, "Is there truth to Nvidia wanting to release a GA104 die 3060 with GDR6X memory? If yes, why would they release such a product?" I think I have heard that from context. So, um, yeah, I mean, I would say that's probably coming. And I tested a 1650 GDDR6 last year. Listen to what I'm saying. A 1650 GDDR6. And in fact, I could overclock it to like 80% more bandwidth than a base 1650. Like I forgot how much bandwidth it had. It was absolutely hilarious how much bandwidth that weak card got. And I think I gave it 80% more bandwidth than stock, and that only boosted performance by like 15 or 20%. Um, that was a disabled 2070. Like, I looked it up. It said, what is it? TU106. 1650 with TU106. They were just getting rid of old Turing yields. They were disabling it a ton, putting it on a cheaper board, with less RAM so AIBs could just dump it. Why would NVIDIA launch a 3060 with GDR6X memory using the GA104 die? It's so they can dump their 104 stock. That's why. And they probably see a place in the market for like a $300 to $350 3060 more so than trying to sell a 3070 for 450 when newer stuff's coming out that's going to replace that segment. That's why these companies do that because you know, the silicon cost itself is not most of the cost of a graphics card. At least it wasn't last gen. It's going to maybe get there next gen where it's maybe not most of it, but a significant portion. Like the die that's used for the 3060, you're looking at less than $100 for that thing, probably like 50 bucks or something for the die, somewhere around there, like 50 to 100 bucks for the 104 die. So the board, 50 bucks, RAM, your top 8 gigabytes of RAM, you're looking at like 60 to 100 bucks and 60 to 80 bucks in RAM, probably. Well, 50 to 80 bucks in RAM. So if you add all of it up, what Nvidia is basically doing when they disable these bigger chips into a smaller one, it looks stupid. But if there's no demand for that higher chip anymore because it's last generation, Nvidia is doing that because disabling the die that much allows them to put it on a cheaper board with a cheaper fan with less RAM that cuts costs everywhere else. And so, yeah, they're eating like $20 in silicon cost by over disabling it, but it allows them to sell it in as a $350 card instead of a $500 card. And sometimes that's worth it to them to get rid of the remaining stock. And I think you're going to see a lot of weird Frankenstein Ampere cards soon as Nvidia continues to try to get rid of Ampere. All right, let me see here. Tech Tips Potato says I should do a collab with Cortex. I don't know if he is into analysis. He just seems to be into hating everybody right now. So no thank you on that one. Roy Lindsay writes in and says, when will game engine physics have a revolution like ray tracing? When will game engine physics have a revolution like ray tracing? I mean, from my perspective, game engine physics continue to evolve every year. It's just not some giant inflection point. And we've seen games like what is it? Red Faction, Gorilla, that had pretty incredible destructibility. And then they just, you see Battlefield's gone back and forth with how much destructibility there is in each game. Um, and they seem to remove it half the time for what they say are gameplay reasons. So I feel like game engines are getting better physics every year. There's just almost a lack in creativity in implementing it in every new game. So like what have we not really seen? Like theoretically, we've seen entire building destructions, we've seen a lot, so I think the revolution's ready whenever a dev's ready to use it well, if that makes sense to you. All right, let me see here. All right, so let me get back to some of these tipped questions here. Du-du-du. All right. All right. So again, like right now, guys, we have almost 800 people watching. The viewers keep climbing. Let's try to get to 800 likes. Double check that you're subscribed to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel. And also click those links in the description. I have a link there to a mini PC I'm testing right now. I actually am going to say good things about it. So I recommend that mini forum PC. And I also like Athletic Greens. Click that link in the description. And let's now get to some more AMD questions. Let's see here. Timestamp 600S APUs. All right. Melodic Warrior writes in and says, after watching Jared's review of the RX 7600X with the Ryzen 7 7735, I'm now even curious to see how the other chips perform. From where I am standing, it definitely looks to give most of NVIDIA's low-end lineup a good run for its money. I would like to know where your thoughts are on some of the new mobile chips from AMD and Radeon. 1 second here. I want to turn off this watch. Yeah, there. Well, I think I've already said this in the opening thing, Melodic Warrior, about what I think about the 7600S, but overall, let's just say what it is. Navi 33 seems totally competitive with the 4060 and 4070 laptop editions, given the proper TDP, despite using 6 nanometer instead of 4 nanometer and still having a small die. So this is impressive on paper, at least so far, what AMD's achieved with a 200 millimeter squared 6 nanometer die. It's all going to come down to price. If AMD really wants to get greedy, you know, then I guess they can charge $1,500 for a 7600 MXT laptop if they want to. And I'm sure there will be some $1,500 laptops that have that. Frankly, you could argue they could charge 2 grand because it's close to a 4070. But if they do that, I don't think they're going to take any market share. And I think it'd be a huge mistake when they can make similar profits to Nvidia while selling their stuff for less. So it's all going to come down to price. What do I think? What I want? What I want to see is AMD launch a desktop 7600 XT that is competitive with the 4060 Ti for significantly less money and try to keep their Navi 33 laptops, even with Phoenix, below $1,500. If they manage to do that, and especially if they manage to get out some $1,000 7700, what is it, 7735HS, so Rembrandt refresh CPUs with the 7600S, if they manage to get laptops out, which I have a Zen 3 Plus system right here I'm testing. If they get out a Zen 3 Plus Navi 33 laptop for $1,000 that has a decent screen and stuff, I think they can take real laptop market share this year. Because the buying habits I'm hearing from retailers is people are looking for deals more so this year than before. And that'll be quite a deal compared to a Lovelace laptop, I think. But if they don't do that, doesn't really matter. It's not bringing new levels of performance. It seems to be competitive with Lovelace efficiency, but not really better. The only reason you make this thing on 6 nanometers so you can make a ton of them for a low price. So that's really my thoughts on it. Navi 33 proves that RDNA 3 doesn't suck all the time, at least, and that they can launch something that's cheaper to make than the competition here that offers compelling performance. But it's only compelling if they charge the right price for it. But the performance is there. All right. Large Bush writes in and says, "Hi, Tom. Do you have any info to share on low-end RDNA 3? Will the 7500 XT or lower be at all competitive with the used price performance we're seeing from products like the 1080 or 5700 XT under $150 right now? I've long since given up hope for Nvidia, but I'm still hopeful that AMD might release a product that actually makes sense for people still gaming at 1080p. Will we see 6600 performance for 150 to 175? 6600 performance for 175? No, I think that's unlikely. You have to understand that the 6600 is selling for like almost $200 a couple months ago. Like, it's not half its MSRP, but it's way below MSRP. So I don't. What's the point in releasing a new card that's that level of performance at that price if they've already got cards selling around there now? That's what I would say. But I do want to check one thing: is the 5700 XT really $150 right now? Well, there's one. It seems like it's more like 160 to 180, which, if you think about it, it's basically the same performance as a 6600 in 1080p while using 50% more energy and being used. Honestly, guys, if you were to say, Tom, what should I get? Let's say a $250 6600 XT or a $180 5700 XT that's used. I'd probably get the 6600 XT. It's a little better, uses a lot less energy, and it's not used. It supports ray tracing. You can play Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition. I actually got that running okay on my Rembrandt APU, which was surprising to me. No, I think these used prices make sense, but because they're there, I don't see why you'd get new cards that cheap right now. And frankly, what I'm seeing testing the 680M that's in Rembrandt and a 7735HS, which again, I have a 775HS system over here. It's really small. Um, I'm finding that it really games in a smooth way, in a way that I'm just not used to with APUs. Like, if you go back 5 years, you'll see people go, well, AMD has this impressive APU. You can really play any game on it. And then you look at and it when they say you can play any game on this, like Steamroller APU or something, what they're really saying is you can play any game at 720p 30 and old games at 1080p low 60. Like Rembrandt, there wasn't a game I couldn't play 720p 60 with like medium settings. Like I even just tried Harry Potter and it actually could run it okay, and so that's exciting, but at the same time, it's definitely not like the way AMD presented it. When AMD announced the 680M, they acted like it was a 1080p gaming APU. it's really more of like an old 1080p, like AAA 720p gaming APU. Granted, again, 720p 60 most of the time. But I do feel like if Phoenix can add that like extra 30% that I leaked they should be able to, that'll sweeten the deal enough to where you're not gaming at like 1080p 40. So many AAA games I tried on Rembrandt, I could get running well at 1080p 40. I just feel like if Phoenix added that extra little performance, you just get to where it needs to be, where you can say it's an APU for low 1080p gaming. And because of that, I'm pretty excited on Phoenix. And also, I don't really see the point in AMD launching like low-end GPUs anymore. Like either you can do all AAA games in low and 1080p or you can't. If you can, if you're a casual gamer, you're not really looking for, right? You're not really looking like, oh, this APU is $200 on AM5 or something. You'd see that and you'd go, it's half the performance of a, whatever, a 7600, but it's most of the price. I don't think that's good enough. I think most casual gamers, when they buy a $200 or less APU, it's more of a yes no question. It's like, can this play AAA games? It can. I have to lower all settings, but it still looks okay. Good enough for me. Because when you get below $200, it's like beggars can't be choosers. It's an APU. You already have an 8 core or something with it. You don't need to buy separate products. Like, I think if AMD actually gets Phoenix to where I think it might get, no, it's not a 3060 like those bogus rumors suggested. But if it gets to where it can play all games in 1080p, I don't really know how it's profitable to launch any of these graphics cards for 150. Like, that graphics card definitely costs more to make than the CPU. The CPU gives people what they need. So what I think is more likely going to happen with RDNA 3's low end is we're going to see, the 7800 XT and the 7700 XT probably out of Navi 32. And then you're going to see a 7600 XT for less than 400, probably 350. 7600, hopefully for $300. We'll see about that. And then maybe they'll and then maybe they'll cut down Navi 33 a little more and call it the 7500 XT. But I haven't heard of a Navi 34 yet, and or at least if I have, I forgot. And I almost don't see how that works out. I think it would just make sense to use Navi 33 for the 7600 XT, 7600, and 7500 XT, and then rebrand the 6500 XT at max clock speeds as the 7400 for like 180 or 150, and then just let APUs do the rest of the work, because I don't really see how you fill in that low end with Navi 34 when there's such a pile of last gen used graphics cards on the market right now. Like Large Bush is asking, I'm hopeful we'll see 6600 performance for 150 to 175. It's the same performance as a 5700 XT, and it's already that price on eBay. So AMD is competing with themselves at that point. I just think it makes sense to maybe use Navi 33, like the ultimate worst yield says a 7500 XT, rebrand the 6500 XT maybe, and just not bother because you'll have APUs that fill it. So there's a long-winded answer, but that's kind of me going, it's hard for me to see the reason you'd launch a really low-end card this gen when there's such an oversupply of last gen and APUs are getting good enough for 1080p. I just don't see, you could make the argument for it, but is that really where your priorities should be? Or should your priorities be on focusing on other products that people probably have more demand for? That's what I would say. All right, let me see here. Let me get through the rest of these APU reader mail submitted by patrons, and then we can get back to these tipped questions real quick. So Beefish writes, and it says, Jared just posted the review for the Asus A16. But surprisingly, his review sample was a 7735, or basically just Rembrandt. What's going on with Phoenix, and why does AMD always seem to overhype and underdeliver on laptop? There appears to be a clear opening in the market, but they can't generate supply. Beefish, I'm going to have an intervention with you here. Followers of this channel, Beefish is a fan, and I appreciate the support, but you do ask a question about Phoenix every podcast, and Phoenix isn't launching till now. The reason Jared doesn't have a Phoenix laptop is because Phoenix wasn't out when they shipped the laptop. Now, what this means when AMD says Phoenix is launching in March is they're shipping it to OEMs now, and then that's going to take weeks to go in and final vet, like to get into the laptops and then ship back to you. So End of this month, you should see Phoenix laptops, and that's when AMD said Phoenix was launching. Beefish, we can complain about Phoenix supply in July. It's not out yet. Like, that is why he doesn't have it. But the 7735 is Rembrandt. So AMD's shipping Navi 33 now with Rembrandt because both are ready. There's no reason to hold them. Okay. Aiden FS. Any rumors of Rembrandt on AM5? No, not at the moment. None. I hear no rumors from anyone I've talked to about either Rembrandt or Phoenix coming to AM5 in the short term. Obviously, they could, but I'm going to be honest. I don't think we're going to see Rembrandt come to. This is speculation here, so bear with me. But if I were to guess, AMD is not going to launch Rembrandt to AM5 until they see how early sales go with the 7735HS, because AMD wants more laptop market share, and there's just not a lot of money in selling their APUs to desktop comparatively to taking laptop market share. You know what I mean? Like, it'd be better to sell a Navi 33 Rembrandt laptop than save any Rembrandt supply for desktop when they can't even make enough APUs for laptop. You know what I mean? Like, why launch this to it's almost a Threadripper argument. If you can't make enough Epic, why launch Threadripper? That's kind of the thing going on. And when they do bring it to desktop, my suspicion is AMD will disable 2 of the cores. Maybe they'll leave all of the graphics enabled, like all 12 compute units, but my guess is they'll just start putting aside, it's not a big die, and it's on 6 nanometer, which is really good yields. My suspicion is AMD will just start putting aside the worst yields of Rembrandt, and then eventually they'll have a stockpile of 6 cores, and that's what they would launch is like the, what would you call it? The 7500G, you know? Because I don't think it makes sense for AMD to sell a quad core Zen 4. I mean, they might, presumably there may be some quad core yields of the Zen 4 chiplets, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of them. And so if I were to try to do a low end launch to AM5, I don't want to use a cheaper 6 nanometer monolithic chip. Well, there you go, Rembrandt Zen 3 Plus. So just take the absolute worst yield, stockpile the 6 cores, and launch that as a 7500G for 150. And that'd be pretty sick. I've tested it. It can play every game. So, and 6 cores would be fine for $150. And it's not even Zen 3, it's Zen 3 Plus. So that's what I think is going to happen. But I don't think that's going to happen this month. If it does, I'll be a little surprised. Or should I say, like, in the next 2 months? All right. We have a tipped question here from Kiwi Sorbet. How do you expect market shares to evolve in the mobile CPU market when Rembrandt still seems to be an underdog despite its superior efficiency over Intel? Hmm. You know, here's what I'll say. Let me write this down too as a timestamp. Laptop market share, and maybe that'll go here as well. So people complain about AMD's laptop supply, which for sure is it's a fact. They don't supply enough laptop chips for the demand. It's harder to get AMD stuff, whereas Intel is just everywhere and there's like sometimes crazy deals on it. Well, AMD has still taken laptop market share every year so far. We'll see if that happens this year. Some analysts I talked to think that AMD is going to maybe tread water in laptop market share. We're going to have to see. But what that means is the fact that it's hard to get an AMD laptop, well, AMD's been taking laptop market share, going from like almost 0% to over 30%. That tells you they are making them. They're making enough to almost get to a third of the market, despite being a company significantly smaller than Intel. So they're making them, guys. And they're going to be an underdog until they can figure out a way to make more chips than Intel for laptop, which is a tall order. I know a lot of people get mad at them rebranding Rembrandt, but it's so they can dual source 6 nanometer with that for their mid range, and then 4 nanometer for Phoenix for the high end, and then also even use Raphael chiplets for Dragon Range and the high end. So they're triple sourcing basically their dies for this, and then even launching Mendocino, which is an ultra small die for quad cores. Little Phoenix is coming as well. You know, they're doing what they can to source from several different nodes at the same time so they can take more market share. Um, you know, how do you expect CPU market share to evolve in mobile this year? Then it's too early to say. all retailers, all contacts I have that sell laptops say AMD laptops tend to sell out instantly. As long as that's the case, they're going to keep taking market share as long as they can keep expanding where they source for their lineup. So I'd say people are underestimating AMD's chance to take laptop market share this year, but also Intel's like stuff the channels with 12th gen, and Intel's going to make it very hard for them to take market share because now they're not a mile behind them in efficiency with Raptor Lake. And they're behind, but not a mile behind. And they're just shipping so much of this stuff. So it's just we're just gonna have to see. But I kind of expect them to tread water this year, to be honest. That's kind of what I expect. And then next year they make a big push. That's what I expect. Preston Morton writes in and I says, I have to thank AMD for dropping prices before the X3D introduction. I bought a 7950X and got free RAM from Micro Center. Not buying a newer GPU though. I bought a tough 6800 overclock already. Is my sync? Do you think I'm thinking the same way a lot of gamers are? Hmm. I mean, I think that's pretty easy. Well, it's probably too soon to say because X3D um just launched, so it's hard to say if it's selling out is just because it's a new launch, but I can check one thing right now. Amazon CPU best sellers. Let's see what we got. Okay. So where is this for sale? So 7900 X3D outselling. Yeah, so it right now the X3D chips, that one's sold out. Is that one sold out? Well, it's above MSRP. So the 7900 X3D is in stock on Amazon, but Amazon's raised the prices due to demand. So at least right now, a lot of people are buying X3D, and that is all we can say. But it's just come out, so it's too early to be sure. I have heard the 7900 X3D is selling significantly worse than the 7950 X3D, but it doesn't seem like it's a complete dud yet. But I wouldn't be surprised if it became that because I personally think the 12 core Vcache model is. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. Um, Having said that, though, you bought a 7950X for a ridiculous price. That is honestly what I would recommend to most people. That's what I said in my Vcache analysis, Zen 4 Vcache analysis. You know, I understand why you'd get a 7800 X3D, which is about to launch, but I just don't know why you get a 7950 X3D unless you're someone like Brian Heemskerk, who is just on Moore's Law is Dead, who's a developer who wants that Vcache for certain apps, wants 16 cores for certain apps. That makes sense to me. But for normal gamers, you know, Zen 4 is like, you can get like a 7900X. I just checked Amazon. So let's put this in perspective. The 7900X3D is $665 on Amazon right now. What is the R9 7900X? That's $440. Yeah. So do I think it's worth paying like 50% more? Yeah, and then the 7900 comes with a cooler and it's 430 and it comes with a game. So do I think it's worth paying 50% more than the 7900 for a 7900 X3D? No, absolutely I don't. And I would think a lot of gamers are making that decision right now as well. To be honest, it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of gamers were waiting to see how Zen 4 X3D pans out before they make their decision. They saw the reviews, saw that, I mean, yeah, in some games it can be 30% better than normal Zen 4, but in all games, it seems like Zen 4 can still do 120 hertz or 144, 200 hertz, and prices have dropped on it. And they're just like, well, it's impressive, but I'm still just going to get the cheaper thing. I would suspect, Preston, a lot of people are making that decision right now. Let's see. Okay, so that is all the tipped questions. I do have a few more Patreon questions. One of them about DLSS 3. Hit the like button, people. We got 770 people watching. Let's try to get to 700 plus likes. Click the links on the description to support Moore's Law is Dead. Make sure you're subscribed. Let me put a timestamp here. Let's see. Okay. DLSS 3, FSR 3. Okay. So, Samantha Vimes writes in and says most reviewers don't seem impressed with Nvidia's DLSS 3 frame generation, and it's rarely even mentioned in discussions on factors to consider before purchasing either Lovelace or RDNA 3. Keeping that in mind, How much does AMD really need FSR3? You outlined your theory recently on a broken silicon and how AMD must take market share. How does FSR3 fit into this? Is there current strategy for taking market share by exiting RFNA2 with already superior raster per dollar, all dependent on you must mean RDNA2. Is that success is getting rid of RDNA2 dependent on FSR3 being successful? Do you think it'll be a bigger factor for RDNA3? I'm struggling to see how another we can do that too tech that nobody really cares about will move the needle compared to simply fixing RDNA3's drivers. Well, I think it needs to be both. You know, I think Navi 33, again, 7600S, its early benchmarks are proving it's good. That RDNA3 can be very good. And so hopefully they can squeeze another 10% at least out of RDNA3 and then have an update that improves ray tracing performance. Like they just had an update that massively improved RDNA2's ray tracing performance in a few games. Or they're I think at least a few games and stuff in 3D Mark. Like they need to do that, but they also need FSR3 sooner rather than later because DLSS 3 will be improved. Again, I think Nvidia's proven with what's happened with DLSS to DLSS 2 to DLSS 2.1 and 2.2 and 3 that while DLSS was kind of a joke when it first came out, it's a major selling point now. Why are we so sure that won't happen to DLSS 3? Look, DLSS 3 is never going to offer the same latency as the frame rate it's pretending it has, right? It's not, it can't. It's averaging frames with AI that's going to add latency. Your 200 hertz DLSS 3 frame rate is going to feel more like 100 hertz than 200 hertz forever. But who is to say NVIDIA can't come up with better algorithms for detecting bad, you know, I've said this before, detecting like bad artifacts and then throwing out that frame before it's done to both not have a weird dolly picture appear on screen briefly, but also to improve latency a little bit. If you cap the frame rate at 200 hertz, maybe a future version of DLSS 3 can throw out some of the frames you don't need because you're capped at 200 hertz to lower latency a bit. And then you'll get to a point where it actually kind of does feel better than if you were just gaming at 100 hertz. Who's to say Nvidia can't accomplish this? I don't think they'll accomplish it right now, but they've laid the groundwork. DLSS 3 is out. It has its uses in a couple of games already in its current form. They're going to keep trying to improve it. AMD has to get something else out now and improve it now so that they don't miss this feature when it becomes a really good feature. That's why AMD has to do this. And frankly, I think this type of frame generation tech will be useful in some games forever. Like I'm trying to think like Mountain Blade Bannerlord. That's not really a latency intensive game, even though you do medieval combat. It's really not. So I could, and that's supposedly coming to that. That's when I want to test DLSS 3 because I play a lot of Mountain Blade Bannerlord. I want to test it there to see if I can notice the difference, how bad it feels. And it's a game that's very CPU intensive because you can have like 1,000 enemies on screen in big medieval battles. So having DLSS 3 ensure that I'm always locked to a certain frame rate might be nice. You know, that Flight Simulator, there's games already where this type of tech matters. And I think it is not important now to most people. I certainly don't think it should be a major factor right now, but I think that in a few years, we're going to look around and go, yeah, like 1 out of 5 games, you turn on frame generation because it does make it nicer. No, you don't do it in Call of Duty. You're not going to do it in Twitch shooters. You're probably not even going to do it in most action games, but there's going to be the occasional slower game that's maybe bogged down by your CPU that this is better than otherwise. And AMD needs to have an answer to that. They do. And I see no reason why they couldn't focus on that and use it as a selling point for their laptops, maybe get it into some console games. Again, I don't think it's important for a Twitch shooter on a PlayStation 5, but let's say there's like, something like Heavy Rain, Until Dawn, um, Man of Medan, these more story focused QuickTime event games. Why not make it so that instead of at 30 frames, like it's 4K 60 on the PS5 with frame generation? That would make a god dang difference. And it might feel smoother. So, yeah, I think that there's a use for this feature, and AMD should get it now to implement it across their laptops, consoles, and stack and innovate on it themselves. So I don't think it's a waste at all. And I just think they have to do everything. They need to fix RDNA 3. They need RDNA 3 as much as they can in the drivers. They need to match DLSS in content parity and performance. And they need to get that open source adoption going. I don't think just because it all takes resources, they shouldn't try to do all of them. AMD is making a ton of money now. They're at like all-time highs in how the company's functioning. They have the money to hire a bigger driver team so they can do all these things at once as well. All right. That was a pretty big answer there to that question, but I had a lot to say about it. Let's move on to this timestamp here. Hello, Tom and Dan. PSVR 2 seems to be really good, but truthfully, at the moment, I don't care. The price is still too high for its limited use and limited game library. Are you hearing anything about Sony planning on releasing support for PC? To my knowledge, the device sends data. Let me change the color here. The device sends data through USB-C, so I can't imagine it being too hard to unlock for other platforms. Then again, I'm no expert. Worst case scenario, I wait 2 years for it to be 400 on Black Friday with a game or two in bundle. Um, hmm. Are you hearing? I'm not hearing anything in the short term about this coming to PC. That was NX Gamer, really really good episode. If you missed it, go check out the NX Gamer Broken Silicon, where he said, PSVR 2 is already recognized by a PC. He can already display some video to it. For sure, they can bring this to PC if they want to. He thinks they would do it in a year from now when they actually have competition on PC. And right now it's about getting market share, getting sales on PlayStation, where the money's at. And then once they're ready, they bring it to PC and support it like through Steam and stuff. Um, I don't hear any rumors of this right now. To be fair, I'm not looking into it, but I definitely think this is something that if they do it, it's not going to happen for a bit now. So I wouldn't be holding out that this happens in a month. I wouldn't. Right now, they're going to be focusing on trying to get you to buy it for PS5. They're going to be focusing on marketing it, getting more games out, and then once they see how that's doing, they'll decide if they want to roll it out to PC to compete with the Meta Quest 3, which already leaked the bomb cost of that, by the way. They broke in Silicon last year. Okay, last Patreon question. If you've got questions, people, ask them now. Get them into the chat right now. Probably going to be done within 15 minutes. Alexander writes in, anything exciting in monitor tech you're looking forward to this year? New things or things that will be newly affordable. Either is fine. Well, I'll do a shameless plug here again. This is sponsored by Micro Center, and they have a link in the description for a $500 32-inch 4K 144 hertz monitor. 4K 144 hertz, $500. That's not bad. So I'm not going to answer this question by doubling down on exactly what monitor I want to see, because I'm aware there's already OLED monitors out there. They're already like half the price of what some insane monitors were a few years ago that were 4K high refresh rate. So I'm not going to hold my breath though either on like when 4K OLED 144 hertz will be 600 $700. What I'm going to say is it seems like monitors are finally in a decent place now in pricing for high refresh 4K compared to where TVs were for years. It was really frustrating to watch LG launch OLED after OLED TV that had 120 hertz, then 132 hertz, adaptive sync, G-Sync support, and then like a a PC monitor with worse HDR that's half the size is selling for like 2 grand. You know, I think we're getting to a point where you're getting good 4K 144 hertz monitors that aren't as good as those LG TVs, but at least they're like half the cost. And we're starting to see OLED ones be the same or less money than those TVs as well. So I don't know that I'm waiting for anything specific. I'm just excited within a year-ish to see OLED monitors be where I wanted them to be 2 years ago and have a lot of good 4K high refresh monitors for below 1,000 and even down to $500 if you check the description. And also 1440p high refresh for below like 300. It's about time we had budget monitors or mid-range monitors that are like HDR 1440p high refresh for like $200. It's about time we had 4K high refresh for 500 or less. It's about time we had good HDR 4K monitors for below 1,000, and it's happening. So I would say what I'm excited for is the options we're getting now, and it only seems like it's getting better. So that's what I would say to that question. All right, so I think I got through all of the Patreon questions. all of the tipped questions, and that means I've got like another 10 minutes if you want to get in one more question here. Um, or ask it in the Moore's Law is Dead Discord in the after video chat section. So I'm looking at the Moore's Law is Dead Discord, which of course you get access to if you support us on Patreon. And you can also do tipped questions now, but otherwise I'll just answer a few more. Let's see. I see how Boomer writes and it says I picked up an open box 4K 60 FPS IPS LG monitor for $180 at Micro Center. Yeah, that's pretty good. That used to be just a few years ago, like $400. So, what's the chances of getting an AMD engineer like Mike Clark on Broken Silicon? Well, the problem is that AMD marketing tends to stop them from coming on. So I would just say if you're in AMD, I dare you to come on Broken Silicon, Um, I talked to a decent amount of AMD engineers, even people higher up offline. And what was it at the last Hot Chips? I chatted with Alex. His last name starts with a P, and he apparently listens to Broken Silicon. He brought up a recent Brian Heemskerk episode a year ago, and he was like, "Yeah, no, I listened to Broken Silicon. Your episode with Brian Heemskerk talking about DLSS and stuff was great, but it's up to AMD marketing to decide if they let any people talk officially. So I would just say if they have a question, come on, AMD. Stop talking, be behind the scenes, and actually come on. Tell marketing to let you come on. Let's see here. Okay, I believe I have one question. Carbon Cry writes in from the Moore's Law is Dead Discord, and he asks, any opinion on Nvidia claiming they cleaned up their inventory situation while having more inventory than either AMD or Intel? Not really. What's Nvidia going to do during their earnings? What are they going to say? We have too much supply and we're going to lose money. I don't think so. I think Carbon Cry, Nvidia's handled their Ampere oversupply enough that they've probably avoided a worst case scenario, right? I think Nvidia's avoided having to dump Ampere at half the price of MSRP. But they still have a ton of inventory and they're still not sure how it's going to shake out. And so they're not going to say anything more than we've handled it, but handled it could mean anything. Handled it could just mean they're not going to have a disastrous earnings. It doesn't mean they still don't have a ton of inventory on their books. Let's see. Wesley Truscott writes in and asks, how do you think the 10 gigabyte 3080 will age? I mean, if you're in 1440p, I think he'll do fine. In fact, if you're in 1440p, let me write this down as a timestamp because I kind of like this. Ampere oversupply 3080 aging. Yeah. How do I think a 10 gigabyte 3080 is going to age? Look, guys, this was going to happen eventually. In 2020, me and a bunch of guest developers, people who talk to developers, said that don't buy a 24 gigabyte 3090 to future proof yourself. Don't buy 64 gigabytes of RAM to future proof yourself. Don't buy the fastest SSD unless you're going to use it right now. Trying to future proof your PC 3 years ahead of time just because the consoles have fancy SSDs and IO is silly. By the time games really leverage them well, um, there will be cheaper options, and there's better options than the 3080 now for the most part. So if you waited, then you can buy something now. But it's been 3 years, and we did say in 3 years things will be awkward, and we're in that awkward period where devs are running into a lot of hitching. Listen to the recent Broken Silicon with Brian Heemskerk. We go deep into what's going on with game optimization. It's probably the best part of the podcast, in my opinion, if you missed it. And the way you make up for like the streamlined approach the consoles have, the benefits they uniquely have, is you use more RAM. This was always going to happen eventually. So look, if you have a 10 gigabyte 3080, let's be honest, most console games right now run it between 1440p and 1800p with dynamic res or something. So I don't know why you would expect to game in 4K with 10 gigabytes of RAM when the consoles are running 1440p with like 16 gigs total. If you have a 10 gig 3080, 16 gigabytes of DDR, you know, if you're going to a higher resolution, you're going to use more RAM. So I think the 3080 will age fine as a 1440p card for the most part. but it's not going to max out all games, even in 1440p due to its RAM, the amount of RAM it has. And that was just always obvious to me in 2020. You know, Nvidia's been selling 11 gigabyte cards for less than $1,000 since 2017. Just because they decided to milk the 3080 a little bit doesn't mean devs weren't going to keep trying to use over 10 gigabytes in the high end for 5 years. So there's really not a whole lot I have to say about it. The 1080, the 3080 was never going to be a card that can like max out 4K forever. It had mid-range amounts of RAM since its launch. The 6700 XT had more RAM, and that should have been expected. It should have been, that was always going to happen a few years after it came out. So, how is it going to age in 4K? I mean, it'll be fine. You're just gonna have to turn down textures. You're gonna have to turn down ray tracing, and 1440p will probably be solid. But there will be the occasional game you still have to turn stuff down. But let's remember, this thing is still already almost 3 years old. So, like, what do I say to someone who thinks, you know, it's kind of like if you got like a 4 gigabyte card in 2016. It was enough in 2016. Go 3 years. Yeah, you have to start turning down settings. It happens. Let me see here. All right, let me see if there's any other questions here. I'm not seeing too much here. A lot of people bringing up Hogwarts Legacy. I think this is going to be last call, guys. Any final questions here? Because I think I got through most of the stuff I wanted to. All right. Post post FSR gaming APUs. Is there any info on FSR3, 7800 XT updates? Are external GPUs dead? Yeah, I don't know. That's a weird one, isn't it? External GPUs never, the interface just never quite seems to be there to not bottleneck them. Am I going to go to hot chips? Not sure yet. Do I have anything on AI performance in Strix Point? It will be better than Phoenix. Heard it here first. Hmm. I'll answer this question. I like this one. Let's see here. 1080 Ti upgrade. So, Diary of Jane 22 writes in and says, Tom, I'm still rocking a 1080 Ti, but I'm looking to upgrade. Do I buy an RX 7900 XTX or wait for better cards and pricing soon? Well, let's do the obligatory 7900 XT update, shall we? Because that thing just keeps dropping in price. So, yeah, it's $800. There are multiple $800 7900 XTs. And in fact, one of them comes with free games. I think they both do, maybe. And they're the AIB model, so they have a better cooler than the stock card. You know, I gotta say, it's a little iffy, but I wouldn't if you're okay with a 1080 Ti right now, at $800, I start to like the 7900 XT a little bit here. Look, it's better than a 4070 Ti. It has over 50% more or almost double the RAM of a 4070 Ti. And 800 bucks, I mean, you're going to be getting something like you'll be pretty much doubling 1080 Ti performance, right? Cuz 1080 Ti are over doubling. So, I don't know. I would honestly say if you're trying to save money right now, the 7900 XT at 800 isn't terrible. And if you see that go down to 750 or something, just get it, man. Like if you're willing to spend that much, because at the end of the day, this is starting to, especially if you account for inflation, approach the price of the 1080 Ti. And at least it has about double the RAM of your 1080 Ti, has features that 1080 Ti didn't have. I think that's what I would recommend because that's going to feel like a massive upgrade without spending a grand. If you want the 7900 XT X, I mean, it just comes down to do you want 24 gigs and an insane amount of performance? But that thing's still over MSRP and a little hard to get. Yeah. So choosing between like an $1,100 to $1,200 7900 XTX or an $800 7900 XT. 7900 XT is what I would get right now if I had to upgrade from a 1080 Ti and I wanted something really nice. So that's what I would do. Um, all right. Well, I think that's gonna do it for this episode. I got through all the questions. Just please, um, you know, hit the like button, share, subscribe. Make sure that you're subscribed. We're trying to grow our subscriber numbers here. And speaking of subscribing, subscribe to the Moore's Law is Dead Patreon. For $2 a month, you get the exclusive podcast Die Shrink. I'll be doing a special interview only that patrons get to hear with that the plan right now is someone who's at Micro Center. So you can really understand their perspective. So that'll be a fun die shrink coming up this week only for patrons, again, just $2. You also get access to the Discord for that amount. You also can get free order mail for me and guests at higher tiers, early ad-free access to the content at higher tiers. There's a lot of content there. We really can't do this without our patrons. So please support us on Patreon if you have the extra money, or get Athletic Greens. I really recommend it in the comments there if you want. An alternative, honestly, to coffee for me is what it's kind of become. That's way healthier. Go to Micro Center if you're looking to build a new PC. Click those links in the description for that. And if you're interested in the Rembrandt APU I'm testing, I have a link in the description to the one model I am testing as well. So all of that's down there in the comments, you guys. Supporting the sponsors that support me really helps, or supporting me on Patreons also helps a lot. And my voice is almost dead. Thank you for watching, and have a good evening, everybody.